Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so delighted you've joined me this evening, wherever you are in the world, and I just want to send each and every one of you loads and loads of love. Tonight's story you're going to love because it's about two incredible creatures, the chupacabra and Bigfoot. But before we get started with tonight's story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dear Sarah, my name is Carla, and I've lived on a beautiful 500-acre West Virginian farm all my life that has been in our family line since the 1800s. It is situated in a picturesque valley consisting of spectacular rolling hills, traversed by an upper river well known for excellent trout fishing, along with plenty of acres of open farmland, ideal for our grazing cows, as well as a vast natural wooded area of both forest and panoramic spectacular views over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Our farm is in close proximity to the Shenandoah National Forest. I live in a superbly constructed brick double-story manor house that is painted in white and has a green copper roof. All the large bay windows and the generous wooden deck areas overlook the most glorious views of the countryside, and there is a pretty shimmering silver lake on the left-hand side of the valley that is in close proximity to our house. This means we can literally observe the wildlife congregating at the water to drink, and we have also seen rare species of bird over there. I grew up on this farm with my brother Douglas and my parents, who raised cattle, chicken and pigs. My parents are older now, but they still live on the land in their own little small quaint bungalow that my husband built for them according to my mother's fastidious specifications. My father occasionally helps my husband with raising our livestock, and despite his advancing years, he enjoys remaining as active as he possibly can. He is always helping out on the farm and taking particular good care of our prize-winning bull Boris, who is a very handsome, strapping character and is fully aware of just how good-looking he actually is. And I assure you that there is not a cow on our pastures that does not fancy him to death and desire to have his genes flowing through their future offspring. My brother Douglas was never ever interested in farming, so he lives and works in Washington with his family and has very little interest in farming at all, but is a successful broker in the city doing a job that he really loves. I am married to a very laid-back, easygoing man called Fred, who's a very skilled cattle farmer, and we have two children, Haley, who's 12, and Eric, who's 15. I'm fortunate enough to have never left my childhood home, but I'm so privileged to be continuing my father's legacy of raising cows on our land. I am passionate about cows, which I believe are underrated by so many who overlook the fact that these creatures are truly wonderful, with such individual, quirky personalities. Growing up as a child, I have seen and heard things on our farm that I could never ever rationally explain. As a young girl, I grew up loving the vast open spaces where we lived, and being very involved in the general affairs of a working farm, as we all pulled our weight together as a family and did our level best to make things run smoothly and spontaneously. I was homeschooled by my mother, which meant that I had plenty of extra time to go exploring as a young girl. And believe me, despite the huge acreage on our farm, I literally knew the whole place like the back of my hand, with the exception, of course, of the vast areas of natural forest that my father actively discouraged me from exploring. At the time, I thought he was worried about the plethora of wild animals that lived in these overgrown areas of tall, majestic trees and underlying thicket. I was never allowed to go into these woods without being accompanied by a parent or without the supervision of my brother. When I was a little girl of about 10 years old, I do remember complaining to my parents about an enormous hairy face with red glowing eyes staring at me through the window at night, which was 8 feet off the ground. I would run into my parents' room screaming and telling them that I'd seen a horrible monster smiling at me through the window. I was utterly terrified by what I'd seen because the creature was so terrifying. My parents kept reassuring me that I was just imagining things and that I just had a very bad dream. I began to be completely convinced that they were absolutely right, but I would always wish that those horrible nightmares would go away. Around about the same time that I was seeing this strange creature at my window on a very regular basis, My parents would find strange but pretty feathers in many colours literally placed directly on my outer window ledge, as if someone had left them there purposely for me, like some kind of a gift. On one occasion my father grew very alarmed when he actually found a single 16-inch footprint outside my bedroom window, which he could not rationally explain, because what human being has feet that big? The strange footprint concerned him for a long while, but it was soon forgotten by the affairs of the farm. There were nights on our farm that we would hear strange calls in the valley, which we could never ever identify. Growing up in this part of the world, you tend to know specifically all the calls of the local wildlife that you hear, from owls to coyotes, but sometimes we would hear strange sounds that reminded us of primate calls. Every so often there were calls that were so menacing that sounded like a woman being murdered. It would always scare me half to death when I heard those horrifyingly terrifying sounds, because they were so ethereal and airy. They appeared more supernatural in their origins than something from this world. My mother at the time was convinced that our woods were actually haunted. One evening, when she heard the ominous roars of thunder outside and noticed some lightning sparks flashing across the sky, knowing that a storm was brewing and it would inevitably start pelting down with tons of rain very soon, she quickly dashed into the backyard to retrieve her washing that was still hanging on the line. She started to feel a few wet drops falling on her skin, and as she surveyed the whole valley, the sky had transformed itself into a smouldering grey colour that appeared dark and ominous and foreboding. She started ripping the washing off the line as quickly as she could by stuffing it into her linen basket. She told me she had this horrible feeling in her gut that made her feel distinctly uneasy. Suddenly she saw this strange flashing movement in her peripheral vision. Then she saw him. It was a distorted figure of a man wearing a cream shirt that was rolled up at the sleeves, that appeared to be floating across the outskirts of the wood, and appeared to possess no legs whatsoever. She told us that it was the weirdest thing that she had ever seen in her entire life, and she was utterly terrified, especially when the face of the ghostly form, with its red face layered in folds of flesh, turned to look at her through those piggy blue eyes that sent shivers down her spine. As suddenly as she had witnessed this strange apparition, it faded before her very eyes and dissipated into a smoky white vapour, and then just vanished. It was years later, when going through old family photographs, that she recognised one of the pictures of my father's great-grandfather, and she told us that this was the very man that she had seen that day with no legs floating into the woods. I gather that my father's great-grandfather lost both of his legs in a dreadful farming accident and had always overindulged in food and drink, which explained the very pink, puffy face. After that experience, my mother never ever liked going into the woods, and she said on many occasions she had actually fleetingly thought that she had seen, through her peripheral vision, a dark, very large, shadowy form seemingly glide into the woods. She was utterly convinced it was another ghost. I had also seen it a few times myself, and I was absolutely certain she was right. It would always happen so very quickly. Now I believe that the creature that we actually saw slipping in and out of the woods was actually a Bigfoot and not a ghost, all these years later. My story begins in 2014, when we would occasionally lose a pig or a young calf on our land, and it would simply just vanish into thin air, and we could not find it or its body anywhere. It was utterly devastating, not only to the calf's mother, but also losing your livestock to some unknown predator is every farmer's worst nightmare, let me tell you. After all, our livestock is a very important part of our livelihood, but they're also important to us as long as they're with us. They are like family to us. We immediately put up trail cameras on our tree in the areas where we have pasture and where our cows graze. To our amazement, all the trail cameras had been shifted to focus in another direction, away from all our cows, and this kept happening. I immediately began to come to the conclusion that there was a human behind our missing livestock. I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I knew that no animal could intentionally move all those trail cameras like this, as could only have been done by something or someone intelligent who did not want to be captured by film. I would set my alarm to wake up at various times during the night. My husband was an extremely deep sleeper and would sleep like a baby, so even the sound of my alarm clock barely ever bothered him. I was so determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, and when I had a bee in my bonnet about something, I could not rest until I had resolved the problem. In this case, I had a dogged determination to find out who or what was behind the curious disappearances of 3 of our missing livestock. One night I was awoken by my alarm at 2 a.m. in the morning. I had a feeling in my gut that my cows were in desperate trouble, and the only way I can describe it is a very strong, clear premonition. I am not usually so intuitive, but on this occasion my gut was screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. Hurriedly I put on my sneakers, my light headgear, and armed with my rifle I ventured out of the doors as quietly as possible, heading directly towards the pasture where the cows were grazing that night. I wanted to find out who or what on earth was actually going on. Even before I approached the grazing field, I could sense a menacing presence that literally sent chills down my spine and made my blood turn incredibly cold. I knew immediately that my gut was right and that something indeed was very, very wrong, and I felt it in every single fibre of my being. I could hear the frightened moos of my cows, and by the way they were thundering around that meadow made me alarmingly aware that they were definitely in the presence of a predator and were very, very unsettled. I immediately cocked my rifle and crept behind a tree, and that was when I saw 3 hairless, blue-grey dog-like creatures with strange claws trying to take down this little calf by clamming down the throat area of the creature with their sharp teeth. I immediately wasted no time in firing several warning rounds and watched those dog-like hairy creatures run like lightning towards the woods. Suddenly I sensed that something else was also watching me from the woods, and my eyes immediately noticed a very large humanoid form with glowing red eyes staring at me and then disappearing suddenly into the woods very fast. It looked remarkably like the ghostly shadowy form I had seen growing up as a girl. Now I was not sure that it was a ghost at all, but what was it? I could not even begin to imagine. Luckily the calf was fine as I examined the poor shaking creature, whose throat was still luckily intact, although I could see the clear indentations of bite marks. Luckily I'd got there in time to rescue the calf and save its life. The mother looked at me with very thankful dark eyes, and I watched her licking the calf with her long pinkish tongue, trying to reassure the poor frightened creature that was wobbling on its leg, so very clearly like it was so traumatized from its narrow escape from such a harrowing death. I immediately did some research on my Samsung tablet while drinking heaps of coffee to keep myself awake all night, and to my utter shock and disbelief, I was absolutely certain that the creatures that I had seen attacking that calf were actually blood-sucking chupacabras. The pictures I saw online of these strange creatures were exactly what I had seen in the pasture moments earlier. I couldn't believe that these creatures were actually attacking my livestock, as I had no real understanding of such a strange, very peculiar predator that had an uncanny similarity to the vampire bat. However, one problem kept resurfacing over and over again in my mind, and that was that these creatures, if they were indeed bloodsuckers, where on earth was the carcass, and why had it vanished? I should have found a calf that I'd recently lost just lying there completely drained of any blood, but that had never ever happened. Nothing was making any sense to me at all. The next evening I decided to put a huge bucket of pig's blood into my outhouse to see whether I could trap one of those chupacabras, if they were indeed bloodsuckers as I believed they were. I surmised that they would be drawn to the smell of that blood, and I was right. I am so glad to say that my plan worked utterly brilliantly. Within 2 hours of laying down my trap, I was able to slam the door behind these 2 dog-like creatures and lock them in. I immediately called my husband, and he was stunned by the strange hairless creatures that were desperately trying to escape. They were scratching away, banging the wooden panels, and making the most strange bird-like calls that I've ever heard, and they also growled continuously. My husband had never seen anything like them in his entire life, and he was utterly amazed that these creatures were indeed chupacabras. My husband went indoors to phone a friend of his for advice to discuss the strange creatures that we had actually trapped and what we should do about them now that we had them in our hands. Suddenly I heard this huge crashing and banging sound coming from the outhouse, and I ran outside as fast as I could, and I was not prepared by what I saw. There was this monstrous, huge, giant, hairy humanoid breaking open some of the wooden panels of my outhouse and letting out the chupacabras out of their traps. I was stunned by what I was seeing because it happened so very fast. I watched these incredibly fast grey-moving shapes scurry through the opening and race past me so very quickly, bolting away, that so fast that I barely saw them. They ran towards the woods, and then they suddenly disappeared. The huge, hairy, humanoid ape-like creature turned around, and he suddenly saw me staring at him with a growing look of horror on my face. I think he was as astonished to see me as I was to see him. What on earth was this strange creature, I wondered. I was so terrified that my whole body literally froze in terror. The creature was so human-like in his appearance, but he also reminded me a lot like an ape. It was almost like he possessed an amalgamation of both humanoid and ape-like attributes, if that makes any sense at all. He was standing yards away from me, and next to him I felt pathetically fragile, small and tiny. This hairy humanoid was covered from head to toe with long, matted, thick black hair that was growing grey in various areas, giving me the impression that the creature was not so young. He was like a 9-foot giant, and he must have weighed about 900 pounds, and his shoulders were monstrously huge, and so were his long arms that literally hung below his knees. In short, the creature was gargantuan. It had a very distinct bullet-shaped head, with a very long face, flat nose and slender mouth, as well as brown eyes with a red twinkling eyeshine that was noticeable in the darkness. I was lucky to see the creature clearly because it was a very dark evening, but the light of the outhouse enabled me to see him in excellent visibility. It was really strange because although the creature was terrifying and made my knees buckle when he looked at me, I have to say that he was more friendly than aggressive towards me. For a moment he held my gaze and moved towards me. I was about to scream in terror, but the hairy hand placed a large eagle feather in my hand that I noticed he had previously had tucked behind his left ear. He made an excited chattering sound to me, as if he was talking to me directly. I really got the distinct impression that he was thrilled to see me, as if I was a long-lost friend that he remembered. Then he walked away, swinging his arms backwards and forwards, and he even turned around a couple of times to look back at me with warm, friendly eyes. I saw him disappearing into the woods, and then 2 figures of those chupacabras came running out of the woods to greet him, like 2 devoted, loving dogs who were utterly thrilled to see their master. I watched the creature with my jaw hanging open the whole time, hardly daring to believe what I'd actually just witnessed. I knew I'd seen the face before as a young girl. It was the scary face that I'd seen staring at me through the window that I believed had been a nightmare, but it had actually been real. He was the creature that had left me all those pretty feathers outside my window ledge all those years ago. I was astonished, and I realised that this hairy humanoid had only ever meant to have friendly intentions towards me, and as odd as this may sound, I began to feel warm feelings towards him as well. Despite his formidable, majestic presence, I just knew that he would always be my friend. Fast forward a couple of months. The good news is that the chupacabras were no longer attacking our livestock and have left our animals well alone. I know that the creature I encountered was a Bigfoot, and he was definitely the hairy face that I saw as a young girl at my window. Ever since I saw him again, he has been leaving me feathers outside my old bedroom window. Sometimes I've gifted him back with presents of jars of peanut butter, granola bars and fruit that I leave on the window ledge. So our friendship has been ongoing, and I have grown to really like this hairy humanoid known as Bigfoot. I know the Bigfoot and the Chupacabras work together as a team in what is known as a symbiotic relationship. The Chupacabras suck the blood, and the Bigfoot eats the meat. It obviously works well for both parties. These relationships are common in the animal kingdom when animals mutually benefit from their relationship together, like badgers and coyotes, sea lions and lizards, as well as cleaner fish and sharks. The Bigfoot responded to those Chupacabras when they called out to him, when I had trapped him. Hearing their pleading, anguished calls, the Bigfoot had clearly come to set them free, and he was the one that had broken down our outbuilding with brute force because he was so incredibly strong. I really believe he turned around our cameras so we could not see him or his hairless blue companions. I believe the Bigfoot has redirected the Chupacabras to kill wild animals in the woods, and we have a huge deer and pig population on our land, which he is culling very successfully. But the main thing is that our livestock are now incredibly safe. My husband is very happy that our livestock have not been bothered again, but he did find the idea of my friendship with Bigfoot so far-fetched and implausible, and he didn't believe my story at first. That is until one day he witnessed the hairy humanoid all for himself, putting a really pretty feather outside my childhood window. The whole day, all I could hear him say was, "I'll be damned! I'll be damned! I'll be damned!" I asked him what on earth he was talking about. He said to me, "Bigfoot is real, and this hairy man has a very huge crush on you, but it's fine by me. As long as he keeps those Chupacabras away from the pigs and cows, and his hands off you, then I'm fine with the hairy fellow." So there you are. That's my story. Well, I just want to thank you for that incredible story. Wow. I mean, we've all heard about Chupacabras before, but Chupacabras and Bigfoot having a symbiotic relationship, it's absolutely extraordinary. Until next time, goodbye and good night.